Hey, this is going to be a quick little mini lecture here. We're going to be using the Python IDE pretty soon for the rest, well, actually for the rest of the course. So I was going to do a walkthrough here of sort of all the settings that we're going to use for installing it, and hopefully little explanations of why. Because IDEs are themselves very complicated pieces of software to sort of handle all the aspects of writing code in one. So they have a lot of configuration settings that kind of matter. So I'm going to be using PyCharm. It's a dedicated Python IDE that sort of has all the bells and whistles. They have professional or community editions. You'll want to get the community edition because it's free, but I already got the installer off the internet, so pause the video and grab that link if you need it. But here we go, it's running. So first things first, we're going to choose an install location. You can leave it as default, or you can install it somewhere else if you wanted. It's going to go in your program files. So I don't need a desktop shortcut. I'm going to check this right here, this update context menu button. What this does is makes it so that if I click on a folder in Windows, right click on a folder, I can open it as a project in PyCharm. Makes working with complicated multi-file Python things a little bit easier. I'm also going to associate .py files with PyCharm. We've seen already a couple times in other videos that if you have Python installed by default and you click something, it'll just pop something up in the command line and then go away usually. This will instead open it up in PyCharm so that you can have a little bit more control of what it does. I'm also going to be updating the path variable. Doing this will make it so that we can run PyCharm sort of from anywhere in the command line if we wanted to. And sure, we can use the default settings for where it's going to put it in the start menu. And now it will install. And I'll pause this while it's installing so that I don't waste everybody's time. All right, so it finished installing. The other thing I'm going to do here, though, before we get into little using PyCharm, is I'm also going to be installing Git on the computer. So we will be using it periodically through the class. I've pointed out, I think already, that sort of how important it is to the programming industry as a whole. There is something that needs to be installed on your computer for it to function, though. It's not built into Windows. So I downloaded the Git for Windows application, and I'm going to install that now. This one, compared to PyCharm, this one has way more configuration options that you kind of need to address. Because this one kind of wants to fundamentally change how some of the underlying text environment tools work on your computer. So I ran it. It's going to have me agree to a license. It's going to pick a spot to install. It's going to do the Git folder just like we did on the last one. Now it's going to start asking me all the questions. So Windows Explorer integration. This is similar to how PyCharm, it's going to make it so that when you right click on things, you have options to do Git stuff with them instead of Python. I'm going to have it check for updates so that it stays up to date. And I am going to leave these other options sort of by default. One of the things Git's going to do here is try to configure my computer, like command line environment, so that it functions like a Linux computer, because Git was originally built with sort of Linux in mind, text management of your machine, and because of that, it's going to ask if it can automatically associate itself with sh files, which are shell files, bash shell files, which is the sort of Linux text environment. It's also going to ask here if it can add a bash profile. I'm not going to let it do that, actually, because I like my command line to function kind of as a normal Windows command line. I don't trust somebody to be managing it for me. All right, so we're going to let it do its thing. This requires a little bit of explanation if you've never coded before. It's asking if we want to install and use Vim. Vim is a visual text editor that's like ancient, extremely stable, and extremely fast. If you have an intention to do a lot of programming, you should probably experience using Vim and get used to it. It still has some things that it can do better than any other, Microsoft Word and stuff, because of how sort of long its life has been. But it's a little bit weird since it's all text. You don't get to, select paragraphs and like drag them around like you would in a tradition, like something that you might be familiar with. But all that's to say, yes, you probably want to use Vim as the default editor for a commit on the command line. So yes. This is a historical, a modern reimagining of a historical concept. Git originally named the initial control branch for repositories as the master branch. This is no longer sort of acceptable phrasing in our society. So they made a choice to change that to being the main branch, or there are some other options. They'd let you name it yourself, but I think their chosen one is the main branch now. You can allow Git to choose what phrasing it wants here, and it will probably go with master for a lot of things, and otherwise it will override it with main. I just let Git choose because it helps it be more stable. I'm going to leave the recommended option here. This is essentially just asking how much you want Git to modify your command line environment. I will do the recommended one so that hopefully it's as stable as it can be. I don't want it overwriting very much, and I also don't want it to not overwrite enough and not be able to function. So I'll just let it configure itself how it wants here. SSH is a secure shell access. It's for it allows you from a command line to remote access something, like you've probably seen remote access software that does desktop environments like TeamViewer or things like that, AnyDesk. OpenSSH is the much older version of that. It allows you to sort of remote over the internet to a different text environment on a computer. It's built into a lot of things. Windows uses what's called OpenSSH. now, which is just an open source SSH client. It's built into Windows. You can override this if you wanted, but you should just use the built-in one. And this is for doing HTTPS, so secure web traffic. You can override and tell it to use SSH as your method of encrypting your traffic instead of using the Windows built-in one. We'll just use the Windows built-in because we don't want to break things. This is also another historical management thing. Windows, so Linux machines, in order to break up blocks of text, we have many lines, and we have many lines in our code and things like that. How a computer figures out where one line becomes another line is via a little hidden invisible character called a new line. And when we get to programming, doing a lot of string manipulation in programs, we'll talk about how to indicate those to a program. But Linux chose to do just one, this little single empty character for doing a new line. Windows chose to do two, a new line and then a carriage feed, which is, has a historical meaning, but essentially it's two little invisible characters instead of one. So anytime you're going from working with text in Windows and working with text in Linux and sort of moving them back and forth, you have to deal with the new line indicators changing. So Git will try to manage that for you here. You can tell it to not manage it, or you can tell it to overwrite everything with Linux, because if you think of it, if you kind of think about it for a moment, you will always be safer if you just do the new line character, because it will always give you a new line. Whereas if you are working with trying to do both, sometimes you're going to have, in the Windows environment, sometimes you're going to not actually get a new line when you put just the new line character. So I'm going to let Git manage everything for me on that one. So only very recently has Windows chosen to start adding features to make its terminal environment function similar to a Linux terminal environment. I've been very happy with how they've added features to make it now functions very close to the original, or to a Linux terminal environment on Windows by default. If you want it to be even closer to a Linux terminal environment, you can have Git use Minty, which is a more, a closer analog to the Linux terminal. I don't care anymore, so I'm going to use the default Windows. This is getting into a little bit of the nitty-gritty of how Git works. So when you pull something to try to update it, when you're working with Git, there are different ways to ask Git to try to do that update that are more or less aggressive in overwriting possible changes that you might not actually want. I let it do its default. So this will try to figure out if it can merge the code changes together without asking you. It'll do that. Otherwise, it will sort of ask you. There's an option here to always ask you, and then there's an option here to sort of always default to the more aggressive overwrites. I think this is the last one. Git has a a long time ago, you used to just be able to pull a repository by typing in a username and password on the command line. That's now not secure anymore because what we know about sort of traffic monitoring. So now it uses credential management that requires you to sort of pop open a browser window and enter your, two multi-factor authentication codes and yada yada. So you do want to have Git managing its credentials unless you really know what you're doing here. And then these are just two sort of under the hood things. System caching will let you sort of open and close your files a little faster, and symbolic links are a way of referring to one part of your computer's memory in another without actually having to copy the file over. You can just tell the program to move and reference this other part of memory. You don't have to worry too much about it, but you should enable both of those. And then you hit install, and I'm going to pause this and let that install. Come on. It's behind my start menu. All right, so it's done now. It's going to ask if you want to see the release notes. So you can just hit no and then finish, and you should be able to now, if you open a terminal window, you should be able to say Git, and it will tell you all you can do with Git. So you are now ready to sort of do a little bit more aggressive programming with Python or code maintenance, and we'll use that pretty frequently in the course.